Hi, everybody. So in this tutorial, we're working on this paragraph, which comes from this source, which is How Sugar and Fat Trick the Brain into Wanting More Food on the website of Scientific American. Okay, so first thing to do always is to make sure you understand our paragraphs, all the vocabulary. So I'm going to invite you to pause the video and look up the new words for you. As learners of a second language, as many of you are, it might look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those 6 words there. Whoops. So look up those words and any others that give you trouble. And then we're going to continue. So pause the video. All right, assuming that you have done that, now we're going to break this down to note form. I'm going to leave the original paragraph on top so that it's easier to compare. First thing I like to do is the bullet points, right, to separate our sentences. There we go. We only have 2 sentences this time. And our next step is to see if basically the second sentence is developing the first sentence. You don't always get, I guess, a main idea in the first sentence of a paragraph, so you can't assume that the second sentence is always developing the first sentence and that your first sentence is always your main idea. It might be the case, but it might not be. So the question we ask ourselves is, does the second sentence develop what's in the first sentence? First sentence says, by the 1980s, scientists had worked out the major hormones and neural connections responsible for metabolic hunger. Got to process that a little bit in our brains. Basically, scientists figure out what causes metabolic hunger, the hormones and neural connections that are involved. They discovered, so that's referring back to the scientists, right? They discovered, that's our scientists up over here, that it is largely regulated. Well, the it goes back to metabolic hunger over here. And regulated by the hypothalamus, well, I guess that's talking about what's responsible for metabolic hunger. So all this is clearly developing. So we then push our sentence in to show that it's developing the previous sentence, and we skip a line to make things clear. Now, that would be the result if we don't go any further in our notes to simplify it, make it easier to grasp the basic meaning of the paragraph. Personally, I don't find that this is much more helpful than what we have over here in the original paragraph. Yes, it does show the second sentence definitely develops the first one, but it's not super helpful for rapidly understanding what's in this paragraph. We need to go further. So let's go further. Let's break down our ideas further. This big long sentence, let's chop it up. They discovered that it is largely regulated by the hypothalamus. And then what comes after that, I mean, that's one idea. It's largely regulated by the hypothalamus. Okay. A region of the brain that contains nerve cells that, okay, so it's a region of the brain that contains nerve cells. And these nerve cells, they do something. They trigger the production of what? And are exquisitely sensitive to a suite of disparate hormones. Oh, that's a tricky syntax over here. So they trigger the production of the disparate hormones, and they are exquisitely sensitive to these disparate hormones. Let's break this down. So it's largely regulated by the hypothalamus. And then we get an explanation of what this hypothalamus is and what it's doing. So since it's about the hypothalamus, we'll indent it more to show that it's developing what's up here. I'll skip a line for clarity again. A region of the brain that contains nerve cells that. That's a lot of information here. So a region of the brain that contains nerve cells that. Let's break this down. Whoops, I'm getting a little lost over here. I want to indent this more because now it's the things at the region of the brain, the nerve cell, what the nerve cells do. They trigger the production of what again? Of these disparate hormones. Let's copy that into here. Of a suite of disparate hormones and are exquisitely sensitive to a suite of disparate hormones. Well, it's the same ones, so let's make that simpler. To these same hormones. Okay, get rid of the little period, skip an extra line for clarity. And now my notes are getting a little bit more helpful than what we had before because we broke down the second sentence into its little parts. We realized we've actually got like 4 pieces of information in that sentence. So our next step is to get rid of unnecessary words. So by the 1980s, if you want it, I guess the 1980s part is, it's a fact that the author wanted to share. Is it really critical? It depends. I guess if you're taking a historical look at things when we came to understand metabolic hunger. By 1980, scientists had worked out the major hormones. Let's simplify that. Instead of had worked out, let's say let's just say they determined. Okay, and we'll get rid of the word the major hormones and neural connections responsible for metabolic hunger. Still a mouthful, but it works. They discovered. Do we need the they discovered? No. Do we need the word that? Not even. So chop that. It is largely regulated by the hypothalamus. That could be shortened by it is largely, if you wanted to, you can just say mostly regulated by hypothalamus. Like that. And then a region of the brain, well, that's a long way of saying a brain region. And that contains, let's make that shorter and go with brain region with nerve cells. That, you don't need the word both, that trigger the production of a suite of disparate hormones. Now, you guys are learning English, and so you might want to keep the vocabulary that pushes you to learn stuff. In that case, don't make changes here. But if I was doing this for myself, I might put in some simpler vocabulary. So instead of a suite of disparate hormones, I would just say production of variety of hormones. Don't trigger the production. Don't need the word the. Trigger production of variety of hormones. And then I would say are exquisitely sensitive to these same hormones. I probably would take out the word exquisitely and put very or highly sensitive to these same hormones. So now we have successfully transformed our paragraph, especially that big second sentence, into a nice little package of information that we can more easily speak from. By the 1980s, scientists determined the major hormones and neural connections that are responsible for metabolic hunger. Found out that it's mostly regulated by the hypothalamus. This is a region of the brain that has nerve cells that do 2 things. They trigger the production of a variety of hormones, and they are also highly sensitive to these same hormones. Voila.